Gaial of Sphere had been born one apart from his fellows, and early proved a source of vexation for his sire. Normal in outward configuration, there existed within his mind a void which ached for nourishment. It was as if a spell had been cast upon his birth, a harassment visited on the child in a spirit of sardonic mockery, so that every occurrence, no matter how trifling, became a source of wonder and amazement. Even as young as 4 seasons, he was expounding such inquiries as, "Why do squares have more sides than triangles? How will we see when the sun goes dark? Do flowers grow under the ocean? Do stars hiss and sizzle when rain comes by night?" To which his impatient sire gave such answers as, "So it was ordained by the Pragmatica. Squares and triangles must obey the rote. We will be forced to grope and feel our way. I have never verified this matter. Only the curator would know." "By no means, since the stars are high above the rain, higher even than the highest clouds, and swim in rarefied air where rain will never breed." As Gaial grew to youth, this void in his mind, instead of becoming limp and waxy, seemed to throb with a more violent ache. And so he asked, "Why do people die when they are killed? Where does beauty vanish when it goes? How long have men lived on earth? What is beyond the sky?" To which his sire, biting acerbity back from his lips, would respond, "Death is the heritage of life. A man's vitality is like air in a bladder. Point this bubble, and away, away, away flees life, like the color of fading dream. Beauty is a luster which love bestows to guile the eye. Therefore it may be said that only when the brain is without love will the eye look and see no beauty. Some say men rose from the earth like grubs in a corpse. Others aver that the first men desired residence and so created earth by sorcery. The question is surrounded in technicality. Only the curator may answer with exactness. An endless waste." And Gaial pondered and postulated, proposed and expounded, until he found himself the subject of surreptitious humor. The demesne was visited by a rumor that a gleft, coming upon Gaial's mother in labor, had stolen part of Gaial's brain, which deficiency he now industriously sought to restore. Gaial therefore drew himself apart and roamed the grassy hills of Sphere in solitude. But ever was his mind acquisitive, ever did he seek to exhaust the lore of all around him, until at last his father in vexation refused to hear further inquiries, declaring that all knowledge had been known, that the trivial and useless had been discarded, leaving a residue which was all that was necessary to a sound man. At this time Gaial was in his first manhood, a slight but well-knit youth with wide, clear eyes, a penchant for severely elegant dress, and a hidden trouble which showed itself in the clamps at the corner of his mouth. Hearing his father's angry statement, Gaial said, "One more question, then I ask no more." "Speak," declared his father. "One more question I grant you." "You have often referred me to the curator. Who is he, and where may I find him, so as to allay my ache for knowledge?" A moment the father scrutinized the son, whom he now considered past the verge of madness. Then he responded in a quiet voice, "The curator guards the Museum of Man, which antique legend places in the land of the falling wall, beyond the mountains of Fur Aquila and north of Ascalay. It is not certain that either curator or museum still exist. Still, it would seem that if the curator knows all things, as is the legend, then surely he would know the wizardly foil to death." Gaial said, "I would seek the curator and the Museum of Man, that I likewise may know all things." The father said with patience, "I will bestow on you my fine white horse, my expansible egg for your shelter, my scintillant dagger to illuminate the night. In addition, I lay a blessing along the trail, and danger will slide you by so long as you never wander from the trail. Gaial quelled the 100 new questions at his tongue, including an inquisition as to where his father had learned these manifestations of sorcery, and accepted the gifts: the horse, the magic shelter, the dagger with the luminous pommel, and the blessing to guard him from the disadvantageous circumstances which plagued travelers along the dim trails of Ascalay. He caparisoned the horse, honed the dagger, cast a last glance around the old Manset sphere, and set forth to the north, with the void in his mind athrob for the soothing pressure of knowledge. He ferried the river Scam on an old barge. Aboard the barge, and so off the trail, the blessing lost its puissance, and the barge-tender, who coveted Gile's rich accoutrements, sought to cudgel him with a knob-lolly. Gile fended off the blow, and kicked the man into the murky deep, where he drowned. Mounting the north bank of the Scam, he saw ahead the Porphyrian scar, the dark poplars and white columns of Cayenne, the dull gleam of San Real Bay. Wandering the crumbled streets, he put the languid inhabitants such a spate of questions that one, in wry jocularity, commended him to a professional augur. This one dwelled in a booth, painted with the signs of the Homoclopalastianic cabal. He was a lank brown man, with red-rimmed eyes and a stained white beard. "What are your fees?" inquired Gaial cautiously. "I respond to 3 questions," stated the augur. "For 20 terces I phrase the answer in clear and actionable language. For 10, I use the language of cant, which occasionally admits of ambiguity. For 5, I speak in a parable, which you must interpret as you will. And for 1 terce, I babble in an unknown tongue." "First, I must inquire, how profound is your knowledge?" "I know all," responded the augur. "The secrets of red and the secrets of black, the lost spells of Grand Mothalum, the way of the fish, and the voice of the bird." "And where have you learned all these things?" "By pure induction," explained the augur. "I retire into my booth, I closet myself with never a glint of light, and, so sequestered, I resolve the profundities of the world." "With all this precious knowledge at hand," ventured Gaial, "why do you live so meagerly, with not an ounce of fat to your frame, and these miserable rags to your back?" The augur stood back in fury. "Go along! Go along! Already I have wasted 50 terces of wisdom on you, who have never a copper to your pouch. If you desire free enlightenment—" and he cackled in mirth, "seek out the curator," and he sheltered himself in his booth. Gaial took lodging for the night, and in the morning continued north. The ravaged acres of the old town passed to his left, and the trail took to the fabulous forest. For many a day Gaial rode north and, heedful of danger, held to the trail. By night he surrounded himself and his horse in his magical habiliment, the expansible egg, a membrane impermeable to thew, claw, ensorcelment, pressure, sound, and chill, and so rested at ease, despite the efforts of the avid creatures of the dark. The great dull globe of the sun fell behind him. The days became wan and the nights bitter, and at last the crags of Fir Aquila showed as a tracing on the north horizon. The forest had become lower and less dense, and the characteristic tree was the deobado, a rounded massy construction of heavy gnarled branches, these a burnished russet bronze, clumped with dark balls of foliage. Beside a giant of the species, Gaial came upon a village of turf huts. A gaggle of surly louts appeared and surrounded him with expressions of curiosity. Gaial, no less than the villagers, had questions to ask, but none would speak till the hetman strode up, a burly man who wore a shaggy fur hat, a cloak of brown fur, and a bristling beard, so that it was hard to see where one ended and the other began. He exuded a rancid odor which displeased Gael, who, from motives of courtesy, kept his distaste concealed. "Where go you?" asked the hetman. "I wish to cross the mountains to the Museum of Man," said Gael. "Which way does the trail lead?" The hetman pointed out a notch on the silhouette of the mountains. "There is Amona Gap, which is the shortest and best route. Though there is no trail, none comes and none goes, since when you pass the gap, you walk in unknown land, and with no traffic there manifestly need be no trail." The news did not cheer Gael. "How, then, is it known that Amona Gap is on the way to the museum?" The hetman shrugged. "Such is our tradition." Gael turned his head at a horse snuffling and saw a pen of woven wattles. In a litter of filth and matted straw stood a number of hulking men 8 or 9 feet tall. They were naked, with shocks of dirty yellow hair and watery blue eyes. They had waxy faces and expressions of crass stupidity. As Gael watched, one of them ambled to a trough and noisily began gulping grey mash. Gael said, "What manner of things are these?" The hetman blinked in amusement to Gael's naivete. "Those are our oasts, naturally," and he gestured in disapprobation at Gael's white horse. "Never have I seen a stranger oast than the one you bestride. Ours carry us easier and appear to be less vicious. In addition, no flesh is more delicious than oast properly braised and kettled." Standing close, he fondled the metal of Gael's saddle and the red and yellow embroidered quilt. "Your deckings, however, are rich and of superb quality. I will therefore bestow you my large and weighty oast in return for this creature with its accoutrements." Gael politely declared himself satisfied with his present mount, and the hetman shrugged his shoulders. A horn sounded. The hetman looked about, then turned back to Gael. "Food is prepared. Will you eat?" Gael glanced toward the oast pen. "I am not presently hungry, and I must hasten forward. However, I am grateful for your kindness." He departed. As he passed under the arch of the great Deobado, he turned a glance back toward the village. There seemed an unwonted activity among the huts. Remembering the hetman's covetous touch at his saddle, and aware that no longer did he ride the protected trail, Gael urged his horse forward and pounded fast under the trees. As he neared the foothills, the forest dwindled to a savanna, floored with a dull, joined grass that creaked under the horse's hooves. Gael glanced up and down the plain. The sun, old and red as an autumn pomegranate, wallowed in the southwest. The light across the plain was dim and watery. The mountains presented a curiously artificial aspect, like a tableau, planned for the effect of eerie desolation. Gael glanced once again at the sun. Another hour of light, then the dark night of the latter-day earth. Gael twisted in the saddle, looked behind him, feeling lone, solitary, vulnerable. 4 oasts, carrying men on their shoulders, came trotting from the forest. Sighting Gael, they broke into a lumbering run. With a crawling skin, Gael wheeled his horse and eased the reins, and the white horse loped across the plain toward Amona Gap. Behind came the oasts, bestraddled by the fur-cloaked villagers. As the sun touched the horizon, another forest ahead showed as an indistinct line of murk. Gael looked back to his pursuers, bounding now a mile behind, turned his gaze back to the forest. An ill place to ride by night. The darkling foliage loomed above him. He passed under the first gnarled boughs. If the oasts were unable to sniff out a trail, they might now be eluded. He changed directions, turned once, twice, a third time, then stood his horse to listen. Far away, a crashing in the brake reached his ears. Gael dismounted, led the horse into a deep hollow where a bank of foliage made a screen. Presently, the four men on their hulking oasts passed in the afterglow above him, black double shapes in attitudes suggestive of ill temper and disappointment. The thud and pad of feet dwindled and died. The horse moved restlessly, the foliage rustled. A damp air passed down the hollow and chilled the back of Gael's neck. Darkness rose from old earth like ink in a basin. Gael shivered. Best to ride away through the forest, away from the dour villagers and their numb mounts. Away. He turned his horse up to the height where the four had passed and sat listening. Far down the wind he heard a hoarse call. Turning in the opposite direction, he let the horse choose its own path. Branches and boughs knit patterns on the fading purple over him. The air smelt of moss and dank mold. The horse stopped short. Gael, tensing in every muscle, leaned a little forward, head twisted, listening. There was a feel of danger on his cheek. The air was still, uncanny. His eyes could plumb not 10 feet into the black. Somewhere near was death, grinding, roaring death, to come as a sudden shock. Sweating cold, afraid to stir a muscle, he forced himself to dismount. Stiffly he slid from the saddle, brought forth the expansible egg, and flung it around his horse and himself. Ah, now! Gael released the pressure of his breath. Safety. Wan red light slanted through the branches from the east. Gael's breath steamed in the air when he emerged from the egg. After a handful of dried fruit for himself and a sack of meal for the horse, he mounted and set out toward the mountains. The forest passed, and Gael rode out on an upland. He scanned the line of mountains. Suffused with rose sunlight, the gray, sage-green, dark green range rambled far to the west toward the Melantine, far to the east into the falling wall country. Where was Amona Gap? Gael of Sphere searched in vain for the notch which had been visible from the village of the fur-cloaked murderers. He frowned and turned his eyes up to the height of the mountains. Weathered by the rains of Earth's duration, the slopes were easy and the crags rose like the stumps of rotten teeth. Gael turned his horse uphill and rode the trackless slope into the mountains of Fur Aquila. Gael of Sphere had lost his way in a land of wind and naked crags. As night came, he slouched numbly in the saddle, while his horse took him where it would. Somewhere the ancient way through Amona Gap led to the northern tundra, but now, under a chilly overcast, north, east, south, and west were alike under the lavender metal sky. Gael reined his horse and, rising in the saddle, searched the landscape. The crags rose tall, remote. The ground was barren of all but clumps of dry shrub. He slumped back in the saddle, and his white horse jogged forward. Head bowed to the wind rode Gael, and the mountains slanted along the twilight like the skeleton of a fossil god. The horse halted, and Gael found himself at the brink of a wide valley. The wind had died. The valley was quiet. Gael leaned forward, staring. Below spread a dark and lifeless city. Mist blew along the streets, and the afterglow fell dull on slate roofs. The horse snorted and scraped the stony ground. "A strange town," said Gael, "with no lights, no sound, no smell of smoke. Doubtless an abandoned ruin from ancient times." He debated descending to the streets. At times the old ruins were haunted by peculiar distillations, but such a ruin might be joined by the tundra by a trail. With this thought in mind, he started his horse down the slope. He entered the town, and the hooves rang loud and sharp on the cobbles. The buildings were framed of stone and dark mortar, and seemed in uncommonly good preservation. A few lintels had cracked and sagged, a few walls gaped open, but for the most part the stone houses had successfully met the gnaw of time. Gaial scented smoke. Did people live here, still? He would proceed with caution. Before a building which seemed to be a hostelry, flowers bloomed in an urn. Gaial reined his horse and reflected that flowers were rarely cherished by persons of hostile disposition. "Hello!" he called. Once, twice. No heads peered from the doors. No orange flicker brightened the windows. Gaial slowly turned and rode on. The street widened and twisted toward a large hall where Gaial saw a light. The building had a high facade, broken by 4 large windows, each of which had its 2 blinds of patined bronze filigree, and each overlooked a small balcony. A marble balustrade fronting the terrace shimmered bone-white, and behind, the hall's portal of massive wood stood slightly ajar. From here came the beam of light, and also a strain of music. Gaial of Sphere, halting, gazed not at the house nor at the light through the door. He dismounted and bowed to the young woman, who sat pensively along the course of the balustrade. Though it was very cold, she wore but a simple gown, yellow-orange, a daffodil's color. Topaz hair fell loose to her shoulders and gave her face a cast of gravity and thoughtfulness. As Gaial straightened from his greeting, the woman nodded, smiled slightly, and absently fingered the hair by her cheek. "A bitter night for travelers." "A bitter night for musing on the stars," responded Gaial. She smiled again. "I am not cold. I sit and dream. I listen to the music." "What place is this?" inquired Gaial, looking up the street, down the street, and once more to the girl. "Are there any here but yourself?" "This is Karch's cell," said the girl, "abandoned by all 10,000 years ago. Only I and my aged uncle live here, finding this place a refuge from the saponids of the tundra." Gaial thought, "This woman may or may not be a witch." "You are cold and weary," said the girl, "and I keep you standing in the street." She rose to her feet. "Our hospitality is yours." "Which I gladly accept," said Gaial. "But first I must stable my horse." "He will be content in the house yonder. We have no stable." Gaial, following her finger, saw a low stone building with a door opening into blackness. He took the white horse thither and removed the bridle and saddle. Then, standing in the doorway, he listened to the music he had noted before, the piping of a weird and ancient air. "Strange, strange," he muttered, stroking the horse's muzzle. "The uncle plays music. The girl stares alone at the stars of the night." He considered a moment. "I may be over-suspicious. If witch she be, there is naught to be gained from me. If they be simple refugees, as she says, and lovers of music, they may enjoy the airs from Ascalay. It will repay, in some measure, their hospitality." He reached into his saddlebag, brought forth his flute, and tucked it inside his jerkin. He ran back to where the girl awaited him. "You have not told me your name," she reminded him, "that I may introduce you to my uncle." "I am Gaial of Sphere, by the river Scam in Ascalay. And you?" She smiled, pushing the portal wider. Warm yellow light fell into the cobbled street. "I have no name. I need none. There has never been any but my uncle, and when he speaks, there is no one to answer but I." Gaial stared in astonishment. Then, deeming his wonder too apparent for courtesy, he controlled his expression. Perhaps she suspected him of wizardry, and feared to pronounce her name lest he make magic with it. They entered a flagged hall, and the sound of piping grew louder. "I will call you Ameth, if I may," said Gaial. "That is a flower of the south, as golden and kind and fragrant as you seem to be." She nodded. "You may call me Ameth." They entered a tapestry-hung chamber, large and warm. A great fire glowed at one wall, and here stood a table bearing food. On a bench sat the musician, an old man, untidy, unkempt. His white hair hung tangled down his back. His beard, in no better case, was dirty and yellow. He wore a ragged kirtle, by no means clean, and the leather of his sandals had broken into dry cracks. Strangely, he did not take the flute from his mouth, but kept up his piping, and the girl in yellow, so Gaial noted, seemed to move in rhythm to the tones. "Uncle Ludowick," she cried in a gay voice, "I bring you a guest, Sir Gaial of Sphere." Gaial looked into the man's face and wondered. The eyes, though somewhat rheumy with age, were grey and bright, feverishly bright and intelligent, and, so Gaial thought, awake with a strange joy. This joy further puzzled Gaial, for the lines of the face indicated nothing other than years of misery. "Perhaps you play?" inquired Ameth. "My uncle is a great musician, and this is his time for music. He has kept the routine for many years." She turned and smiled at Ludowick, the musician. Gaial nodded politely. Ameth motioned to the bounteous table. "Eat, Gaial, and I will pour you wine. Afterwards, perhaps you will play the flute for us." "Gladly," said Gaial, and he noticed how the joy on Ludowick's face grew more apparent, quivering around the corners of his mouth. He ate, and Ameth poured him golden wine until his head went to reeling. And never did Ludowick cease his piping. Now a tender melody of running water, again a grave tune that told of the lost ocean to the west, another time a simple melody, such as a child might sing at his games. Gaial noted with wonder how Ameth fitted her mood to the music, grave and gay as the music led her. Strange, thought Gaial. But then, people thus isolated were apt to develop peculiar mannerisms, and they seemed kindly withal. He finished his meal and stood erect, steadying himself against the table. Ludowick was playing a lilting tune, a melody of glass birds swinging round and round on a red string in the sunlight. Ameth came dancing over to him and stood close, very close, and he smelled the warm perfume of her loose golden hair. Her face was happy and wild. Peculiar how Ludowick watched so grimly, and yet without a word. Perhaps he misdoubted the stranger's intent. Still, "Now," breathed Ameth, "perhaps you will play the flute. You are so strong and young." Then she said quickly, as she saw Gaial's eyes widen, "I mean, you will play on the flute for old Uncle Ludowick, and he will be happy and go off to bed, and then we will sit and talk far into the night." "Gladly will I play the flute," said Gaial. Curse the tongue of his, at once so fluent and yet so numb. It was the wine. "Gladly will I play. I am accounted quite skilful at my home manse at Sphere." He glanced at Ludowick, then stared at the expression of crazy gladness he had surprised. Marvelous that a man should be so fond of music. "Then play," breathed Ameth, urging him a little toward Ludowick and the flute. "Perhaps," suggested Guile. "I had better wait till your uncle pauses. I would seem discourteous." "No. As soon as you indicate that you wish to play, he will let off. Merely take the flute. You see," she confided, "he is rather deaf." "Very well," said Guile, "except that I have my own flute." And he brought it out from under his jerkin. "Why, what is the matter?" For a startling change had come over the girl and the old man. A quick light had risen in her eyes, and Ludowic's strange gladness had gone. And there was but dull hopelessness in his eyes, stupid resignation. Guile slowly stood back, bewildered. "Do you not wish me to play?" There was a pause. "Of course," said Ameth, young and charming once more. "But I'm sure that Uncle Ludowic would enjoy hearing you play his flute. He is accustomed to the pitch. Another scale might be unfamiliar." Ludowic nodded, and hope again shone in the rheumy old eyes. It was indeed a fine flute, Guile saw, a rich piece of white metal, chased and set with gold, and Ludowic clutched this flute as if he would never let go. "Take the flute," suggested Ameth. "He will not mind in the least." Ludowic shook his head to signify the absence of his objections, but Guile, noting with distaste the long-stained beard, also shook his head. "I can play any scale, any tone on my flute. There is no need for me to use that of your uncle and possibly distress him. Listen." And he raised his instrument. "Here is a song of Cain called The Opal, the Pearl, and the Peacock." He put the pipe to his lips and began to play, very skillfully indeed, and Ludowic followed him, filling in gaps, making chords. Ameth, forgetting her vexation, listened with eyes half closed and moved her arm to the rhythm. "Did you enjoy that?" asked Guile when he had finished. "Very much." "Perhaps you would try it on Uncle Ludowic's flute? It is a fine flute to play, very soft and easy to the breath." "No," said Guile with sudden obstinacy. "I am able to play only my own instrument." He blew again, and it was a dance of the festival, a quirking carnival air. Ludowic, playing with supernal skill, ran merry phrases as might fit, and Ameth, carried away by the rhythm, danced a dance of her own, a merry step in time to the music. Guile played a wild tarantella of the peasant folk, and Ameth danced wilder and faster, flung her arms, wheeled, jerked her head in a fine display, and Ludowic's flute played a brilliant obligato, hurrying over, now under, chording, veering, warping little silver strings of sound around Guile's melody, adding urgent little grace phrases. Ludowic's eyes now clung to the whirling figure of the dancing girl. And suddenly he struck up a theme of his own, a tune of wildest abandon, of a frenzied beating rhythm, and Guile, carried away by the force of the music, blew as he never had blown before, invented trills and runs, gyrating arpeggios, blew high and shrill, loud and fast and clear. It was as nothing to Ludowic's music. His eyes were starting, sweat streamed from his seamed old forehead. His flute tore the air into quivering, ecstatic shreds. Ameth danced frenzy. She was no longer beautiful. She appeared grotesque and unfamiliar. The music became something more than the senses could bear. Guile's own vision turned pink and gray. He saw Ameth fall in a faint, in a foaming fit, and Ludowic, fiery-eyed, staggered erect, hobbled to her body and began a terrible, intense concord, slow measures of most solemn and frightening meaning. Ludowic played death. Guile of Sphere turned and ran wide-eyed from the hall. Ludowick, never noticing, continued his terrible piping, played as if every note were a skewer through the twitching girl's shoulder blades. Guile ran through the night, and cold air bit at him like sleet. He burst into the shed, and the white horse softly nickered at him. On with the saddle, on with the bridle, away down the streets of old Carchesel, past the gaping black windows, ringing down the starlit cobbles, away from the music of death. Guile of Sphere galloped up the mountain with the stars in his face, and not until he came to the shoulder did he turn in the saddle to look back. The verging of dawn trembled into the stony valley. Where was Carchesel? There was no city, only a crumble of ruins. Hark! A far sound? No. All was silence. And yet, no. Only crumbled stones in the floor of the valley. Guile, fixed of eye, turned and went his way, along the trail which stretched north before him. The walls of the defile which led the trail were steep gray granite, stained scarlet and black by lichen, mildewed blue. The horse's hooves made a hollow clop, clop, clop on the stone, loud to Guile's ears, hypnotic to his brain, and after the sleepless night he found his frame sagging. His eyes grew dim and warm with drowsiness, but the trail ahead led to unseen vistas, and the void in Guile's brain drove him without surcease. The lassitude became such that Guile slipped halfway from his saddle. Rousing himself, he resolved to round one more bend in the trail, and then take rest. The rock beetled above and hid the sky where the sun had passed the zenith. The trail twisted around a shoulder of rock. Ahead shone a patch of indigo heaven. One more turning, Guile told himself. The defile fell open. The mountains were at his back, and he looked out across 100 miles of steppe. It was a land shaded with subtle colors, washed with delicate shadows, fading and melting into the lurid haze at the horizon. He saw a lone eminence cloaked by a dark company of trees, the glisten of a lake at its foot. To the other side, a ranked mass of gray-white ruins was barely discernible. The Museum of Man? After a moment of vacillation, Guile dismounted and sought sleep within the expansible egg. The sun rolled in sad, sumptuous majesty behind the mountains. Murk fell across the tundra. Guile woke and refreshed himself in a rill nearby. Giving meal to his horse, he ate dry fruit and bread. Then he mounted and rode down the trail. The plain spread vastly north before him, into desolation. The mountains lowered black above and behind. A slow, cold breeze blew in his face. Gloom deepened. The plain sank from sight like a drowned land. Hesitant before the murk, Guile reined his horse. Better, he thought, to ride in the morning. If he lost the trail in the dark, who could tell what he might encounter? A mournful sound. Guile stiffened and turned his face to the sky. A sigh? A moan? A sob? Another sound, closer, the rustle of cloth, a loose garment. Guile cringed into his saddle. Floating slowly down through the darkness came a shape robed in white. Under the cowl and glowing with ear light, a drawn face with eyes like the holes in a skull. It breathed its sad sound and drifted away on high. There was only the blow of the wind past Guile's ears. He drew a shuddering breath and slumped against the pommel. His shoulders felt exposed, naked. He slipped to the ground and established the shelter of the egg about himself and his horse. Preparing his pallet, he lay himself down. Presently, as he lay staring into the dark, sleep came on him, and so the night passed. He awoke before dawn and once more set forth. The trail was a ribbon of white sand between banks of gray firs, and the miles passed swiftly. The trail led toward the three-clothed eminence Gael had noted from above. Now he thought to see roofs through the heavy foliage and smoke on the sharp air, and presently to right and left spread cultivated fields of spikenard, callow, and mead-apple. Gael continued with eyes watchful for men. To one side appeared a fence of stone and black timber, the stone chiseled and hewn to the semblance of 4 globes beaded on a central pillar, the black timbers which served as rails fitted in sockets and carved in precise spirals. Behind this fence a region of bare earth lay churned, pitted, cratered, burned and wrenched, as if visited at once by fire and the blow of a tremendous hammer. In wondering speculation, Gael gazed, and so did not notice the 3 men who came quietly upon him. The horse started nervously. Gael, turning, saw the 3. They barred his road, and one held the bridle of his horse. They were tall, well-formed men, wearing tight suits of somber leather, bordered with black. Their headgear was heavy maroon cloth, crumpled in precise creases, and leather flaps extended horizontally over each ear. Their faces were long and solemn, with clear golden ivory skin, golden eyes, and jet-black hair. Clearly they were not savages. They moved with a silky control. They eyed Gael with critical appraisal. Their garb implied the discipline of an ancient convention. The leader stepped forward. His expression was neither threat nor welcome. "Greetings, stranger. Whither bound?" "Greetings," replied Gael cautiously. "I go as my star directs. You are the Saponids?" "That is our race, and before you is our town Sapons." He inspected Gael with frank curiosity. "By the color of your custom, I suspect your home to be in the south." "I am Gael of Sphere, by the river Scam in Ascalay." "The way is long," observed the Saponid. "Terrors beset the traveler. Your impulse must be most intense, and your star must draw with fervent allure." "I come," said Gael, "on a pilgrimage for the ease of my spirit. The road seems short when it attains its end." The Saponid offered polite acquiescence. "Then you have crossed the fur Aquilus?" "Indeed, though cold wind and desolate stone." Gael glanced back at the looming mass. "Only yesterday at nightfall did I leave the gap, and then a ghost hovered above till I thought the grave was marking me for its own." He paused in surprise. His words seemed to have released a powerful emotion in the Saponids. Their features lengthened, their mouths grew white and clenched. The leader, his polite detachment a trifle diminished, searched the sky with ill-concealed apprehension. "A ghost? In a white garment, thus and so, floating on high?" "Yes. Is it a known familiar of the region?" There was a pause. "In a certain sense," said the Saponid. "It is a signal of woe. But I interrupt your tale." "There is little to tell. I took shelter for the night, and this morning I fared down to the plain." "Were you not molested further? By Cool Ball, the walking serpent who ranges the slopes like fate?" "I saw neither walking serpent nor crawling lizard. Further, a blessing protects my trail, and I come to no harm so long as I keep my course." "Interesting, interesting." "Now," said Gael, "permit me to inquire of you, since there is much I would learn. What is this ghost, and what evil does he commemorate?" "You ask beyond my certain knowledge," replied the Saponid cautiously. "Of this ghost it is well not to speak, lest our attention reinforce his malignity." "As you will," replied Gael. "Perhaps you will instruct me—" He caught his tongue. Before inquiring for the Museum of Man, it would be wise to learn in what regard the Saponids held it, lest, learning his interest, they seek to prevent him from knowledge. "Yes?" inquired the Saponid. "What is your lack?" Guile indicated the seared area behind the fence of stone and timber. "What is the portent of this devastation?" The Saponid stared across the area with a blank expression and shrugged. "It is one of the ancient places. So much is known, no more. Death lingers here, and no creature may venture across the place without succumbing to a most malicious magic which raises virulence and angry sores. Here is where those whom we kill are sent. But away. You will desire to rest and refresh yourself at Sapons. Come, we will guide you." He turned down the trail toward the town, and Guile, finding neither words nor reasons to reject the idea, urged his horse forward. As they approached the tree-shrouded hill, the trail widened to a road. To the right hand the lake drew close, behind low banks of purple reeds. Here were docks built of heavy black balks, and boats rocked to the wind-feathered ripples. They were built in the shape of sickles, with bow and stern curving high from the water. Up into the town, and the houses were hewn timber, ranging in tone from golden brown to weathered black. The construction was intricate and ornate, the walls rising 3 stories to steep gables overhanging front and back. Pillars and piers were carved with complex designs, meshing ribbons, tendrils, leaves, lizards, and the like. The screens which guarded the windows were likewise carved, with foliage patterns, animal faces, radiant stars, rich textures in the mellow wood. It was clear that much expressiveness had been expended on the carving. Up the steep lane, under the gloom cast by the trees, past the houses half hidden by the foliage, and the Saponids of Sapons came north to stare. They moved quietly and spoke in low voices, and their garments were of an elegance Guile had not expected to see on the northern steppe. His guide halted and turned to Guile. "Will you oblige me by waiting till I report to the voivode, that he may prepare a suitable reception?" The request was framed in candid words and with guileless eyes. Guile thought to perceive ambiguity in the phrasing, but since the hooves of his horse were planted in the center of the road, and since he did not propose leaving the road, Guile assented with an open face. The Saponid disappeared, and Guile sat musing on the pleasant town perched so high above the plain. A group of girls approached to glance at Guile with curious eyes. Guile returned the inspection, and now found a puzzling lack about their persons, a discrepancy which he could not instantly identify. They wore graceful garments of woven wool, striped and dyed various colors. They were supple and slender, and seemed not lacking in coquetry. And yet... The Saponid returned. "Now, Sir Guile, may we proceed?" Guile, endeavoring to remove any flavor of suspicion from his words, said, "You will understand, Sir Saponid, that by the very nature of my father's blessing I dare not leave the delineated course of the trail, for then instantly I would become liable to any curse, which placed on me along the way might be seeking just such occasion for leeching close on my soul." The Saponid made an understanding gesture. "Naturally. You follow a sound principle. Let me reassure you, I but conduct you to a reception by the voivode, who even now hastens to the plaza to greet a stranger from the far south." Guile bowed in gratification, and they continued up the road. 100 paces and the road leveled, crossing a common planted with small, fluttering, heart-shaped leaves colored in all shades of purple, red, green, and black. The Saponid turned to Guile. "As a stranger, I must caution you never to set foot on the common. It is one of our sacred places, and tradition requires that a severe penalty be exacted for transgressions and sacrilege." "I note your warning," said Gael. "I will respectfully obey your law." They passed a dense thicket. With hideous clamor, a bestial shape sprang from concealment, a creature staring-eyed with tremendous fanged jaws. Gael's horse shied, bolted, sprang out onto the sacred common, and trampled the fluttering leaves. A number of Saponid men rushed forth, grasped the horse, seized Gael, and dragged him from the saddle. "Ho!" cried Gael. "What means this? Release me!" The Saponid, who had been his guide, advanced, shaking his head in reproach. "Indeed, and only had I just impressed upon you that gravity of such an offense." "But the monster frightened my horse," said Gael. "I am no wise responsible for this trespass. Release me. Let us proceed to the reception." The Saponid said, "I fear that the penalties prescribed by tradition must come into effect. Your protests, though of superficial plausibility, will not bear serious examination. For instance, the creature you term a monster is in reality a harmless domesticated beast. Secondly, I observe the animal you bestride. He will not make a turn or twist without the twitch of the reins. Thirdly, even if your postulates were conceded, you thereby admit to guilt by virtue of negligence and omission. You should have secured a mount less apt to unpredictable action, or upon learning of the sanctitude of the common, you should have considered such a contingency as even now occurred, and therefore dismounted, leading your beast. Therefore, Sir Gael, though loath, I am forced to believe you guilty of impertinence, impiety, disregard, and impudicity. Therefore, as Castellan and Sergeant Reader of the Litany, so responsible for the detention of lawbreakers, I must order you secured, contained, pent, incarcerated, and confined until such time as the penalties will be exacted." "The entire episode is mockery," raged Gael. "Are you savages, then, thus to mistreat a lone wayfarer?" "By no means," replied the Castellan. "We are a highly civilized people with customs bequeathed us by the past. Since the past was more glorious than the present, what presumption we would show by questioning these laws." Gael fell quiet. "And what are the usual penalties for my act?" The Castellan made a reassuring motion. "The rote prescribes 3 acts of penance, which in your case I am sure will be nominal. But the forms must be observed, and it is necessary that you be constrained in the felon's case-board." He motioned to the men who held Gael's arm. "Away with him. Cross neither track nor trail, for then your grasp will be nerveless, and he will be delivered from justice." Gael was pent in a well-aired but poorly lighted cellar of stone. The floor he found dry, the ceiling free of crawling insects. He had not been searched, nor had his scintillant dagger been removed from his sash. With suspicions crowding his brain, he lay on the rush bed and, after a period, slept. Now ensued the passing of a day. He was given food and drink, and at last the Castellan came to visit him. "You are indeed fortunate," said the Saponid, "in that, as a witness, I was able to suggest your delinquencies to be more the result of negligence than malice. The last penalties exacted for the crime were stringent. The felon was ordered to perform the following 3 acts. First, to cut off his toes and sew the severed members into the skin at his neck. Second, to revile his forebears for 3 hours, commencing with a common bill of anathema, including feigned madness and hereditary disease, and at last defiling the hearth of his clan with ordure. And third, walking a mile under the lake with leaded shoes in search of the lost Book of Kells. And the Castellan regarded Gael with complacency. "What deeds must I perform?" inquired Gael dryly. The Castellan joined the tips of his fingers together. "As I say, the penances are nominal, by decree of the voivode. First you must swear never again to repeat your crime." "That I gladly do," said Gael, and so bound himself. "Second," said the Castellan with a slight smile, "you must adjudicate at a grand pageant of pulchritude among the maids of the village, and select her whom you deem the most beautiful." "Scarcely an arduous task," commented Gael. "Why does it fall to my lot?" The Castellan looked vaguely to the ceiling. "There are a number of concomitants to victory in this contest. Every person in the town would find relations among the participants, a daughter, a sister, a niece, and so would hardly be considered unprejudiced. The charge of favoritism could never be leveled against you. Therefore you make an ideal selection for this important post." Gael seemed to hear the ring of sincerity in the Saponid's voice. Still, he wondered why the selection of the town's loveliest was a matter of such import. "And third?" he inquired. "That will be revealed after the contest, which occurs this afternoon." The Saponid departed the cell. Gael, who was not without vanity, spent several hours restoring himself and his costume from the ravages of travel. He bathed, trimmed his hair, shaved his face, and, when the Castellan came to unlock the door, he felt that he made no discreditable picture. He was led out upon the road and directed up the hill toward the summit of the terraced town of Sapons. Turning to the Castellan, he said, "How is it that you permit me to walk the trail once more? You must know that now I am safe from molestation." The Castellan shrugged. "True, but you would gain little by insisting upon your temporary immunity. Ahead the trail crosses a bridge, which we could demolish. Behind we need but breach the dam to Pilvenchel torrent. Then, should you walk the trail, you would be swept to the side and so rendered vulnerable. No, Sir Gael of Sphere, once the secret of your immunity is abroad, then you are liable to a variety of stratagems. For instance, a large wall might be placed athwart the way, before and behind you. No doubt the spell would preserve you from thirst and hunger, but what then? So would you sit till the sun went out?" Gael said no word. Across the lake he noticed a trio of the crescent boats approaching the docks, prows and sterns rocking and dipping into the shaded water with a graceful motion. The void in his mind made itself known. "Why are boats constructed in such fashion?" The Castellan looked blankly at him. "It is the only practicable method. Do not the oway pods grow thusly to the south?" "Never have I seen oway pods." "They are the fruit of a great vine, and grow in scimitar shape. When sufficiently large, we cut and clean them, slit the inner edge, grapple end to end with strong line, and constrict till the pod opens, as is desirable. Then, when cured, dried, varnished, carved, burnished, and lacquered, fitted with deck, thwarts, and gussets, then we have our boats." They entered the plaza, a flat area at the summit surrounded on 3 sides by tall houses of carved dark wood. The 4th side was open to a vista across the lake, and beyond to the loom of the mountains. Trees overhung all, and the sun shining through made a scarlet pattern on the sandy floor. To Gael's surprise, there seemed to be no preliminary ceremonies or formalities to the contest, and small spirit of festivity was manifest among the townspeople. Indeed, they seemed beset by subdued despondency, and eyed him without enthusiasm. 100 girls stood gathered in a disconsolate group in the center of the plaza. It seemed to Guile that they had gone to few pains to embellish themselves for beauty. To the contrary, they wore shapeless rags, their hair seemed deliberately misarranged, their faces dirty and scowling. Guile stared and turned to his guide. These girls seem not to relish the garland of pulchritude. The Castellan nodded wryly. As you see, they are by no means jealous for distinction. Modesty has always been a Saponid trait. Guile hesitated. What is the form of procedure? I do not desire in my ignorance to violate another of your arcane apocrypha. The Castellan said with a blank face, There are no formalities. We conduct these pageants with expedition and the least possible ceremony. You need but pass among these maidens and point out her whom you deem the most attractive. Guile advanced to his task, feeling more than half foolish. Then he reflected. This is a penalty for contravening an absurd tradition. I will conduct myself with efficiency, and so the quicker rid myself of the obligation. He stood before the 100 girls, who eyed him with hostility and anxiety, and Guile saw that his task would not be simple, since, on the whole, they were of a comeliness which even the dirt, grimacing, and rags could not disguise. "Range yourselves, if you please, into a line," said Guile. "In this way none will be at disadvantage." Sullenly, the girls formed a line. Guile surveyed the group. He saw at once that a number could be eliminated. The squat, the obese, the lean, the pocked, and coarse-featured, perhaps a quarter of the group. He said suavely, "Never have I seen such unanimous loveliness. Each of you might legitimately claim the cordon. My task is arduous. I must weigh fine imponderables. In the end, my choice will undoubtedly be based on subjectivity, and those of real charm will no doubt be the first discharged from the competition." He stepped forward. "Those whom I indicate may retire." He walked down the line, pointed, and the ugliest, with expressions of unmistakable relief, hastened to the sidelines. A second time Guile made his inspection, and now, somewhat more familiar with those he judged, he was able to discharge those who, while suffering no whit from ugliness, were merely plain. Roughly a third of the original group remained. These stared at Guile with varying degrees of apprehension and truculence as he passed before them, studying each in turn. All at once his mind was determined, and his choice definite. Somehow the girls felt the change in him, and in their anxiety and tension left off the expressions they had been wearing to daunt and bemuse him. Guile made one last survey down the line. No, he had been accurate in his choice. There were girls here as comely as the senses could desire, girls with opal glowing eyes and hyacinth features, girls as lissom as reeds, with hair silky and fine despite the dust which they seemed to have rubbed upon themselves. The girl whom Guile had selected was slighter than the others and possessed of a beauty not at once obvious. She had a small, triangular face, great wistful eyes, and thick black hair cut raggedly short at the ears. Her skin was of a transparent paleness, like the finest ivory. Her form slender, graceful, and of a compelling magnetism, urgent of intimacy. She seemed to have sensed his decision, and her eyes widened. Guile took her hand, led her forward, and turned to the voivode, an old man sitting stolidly in a heavy chair. "This is she whom I find the loveliest among your maidens." There was silence through the square. Then there came a hoarse sound, a cry of sadness from the Castellan and Sergeant Reader. He came forward, sagging of face, limp of body. "Guile of Sphere, you have wrought a great revenge for my tricking you. This is my beloved daughter, Cheryl, whom you have designated for dread." Guile turned in wonderment from the castellan to the girl, Cheryl, in whose eyes he now recognized a film of numbness, a gazing into a great depth. Returning to the castellan, Guile stammered, "I meant but complete impersonality. This your daughter, Cheryl, I find one of the loveliest creatures of my experience. I cannot understand where I have offended." "No, Guile," said the castellan. "You have chosen fairly, for such indeed is my own thought." "Well then," said Guile, "reveal to me now my third task, that I may have done and continue my pilgrimage." The castellan said, 3 leagues to the north lies the ruin which tradition tells us to be the olden Museum of Man." "Ah," said Guile, "go on, I attend." "You must, as your third charge, conduct this my daughter Cheryl to the Museum of Man. At the portal you will strike on a copper gong and announce to whomever responds, 'We are those summoned from Sapons.'" Guile started, frowned. "How is this? We?" "Such is your charge," said the castellan in a voice like thunder. Guile looked to left, right, forward, and behind, but he stood in the center of the plaza, surrounded by the hardy men of Sapons. "When must this charge be executed?" he inquired in a controlled voice. The castellan said in a voice bitter as oakwort, "Even now Cheryl goes to clothe herself in yellow. In 1 hour shall she appear. In 1 hour shall you set forth for the Museum of Man." "And then?" "And then, for good or for evil, it is not known. You fare as 13,000 have fared before you." Down from the plaza, down the leafy lanes of Sapons, came Guile, indignant and clamped of mouth, though the pit of his stomach felt tender and heavy with trepidation. The ritual carried distasteful overtones. Execution or sacrifice. Guile's step faltered. The castellan seized his elbow with a hard hand. "Forward!" Execution or sacrifice. The faces along the lane swam with morbid curiosity, inner excitement. Gloating eyes searched him deep to relish his fear and horror, and the mouths half drooped, half smiled, in the inner hugging for joy not to be the one walking down the foliaged streets and forth to the Museum of Man. The eminence with the tall trees and carved dark houses was at his back. They walked out into the claret sunlight of the tundra. Here were 80 women in white chlamys with ceremonial buckets of woven straw over their heads. Around a tall tent of yellow silk they stood. The castellan halted Guile and beckoned to the ritual matron. She flung back the hangings at the door of the tent. The girl within, Cheryl, came slowly forth, eyes wide and dark with fright. She wore a stiff gown of yellow brocade, and the wan of her body seemed pent and constrained within. The gown came snug under her chin, left her arms bare, and raised past the back of her head in a stiff, spear-headed cowl. She was frightened as a small animal trapped is frightened. She stared at Guile, at her father, as if she had never seen them before. The ritual matron put a gentle hand on her waist, propelled her forward. Cheryl stepped once, twice, irresolutely halted. The castellan brought Guile forward and placed him at the girl's side. Now 2 children, a boy and a girl, came hastening up with cups which they proffered to Guile and Cheryl. "I have come far for the privilege. I would not stultify the occasion stumbling and staggering." And he handed the cup back to the boy. Cheryl stared dully at the cup she held. Said Guile, "I advise you likewise to avoid the drug. So will we come to the Museum of Man with our dignity to us." Hesitantly she returned the cup. The castellan's brow clouded, but he made no protest. An old man in a black costume brought forward a satin pillow on which rested a whip with a handle of carved steel. The castellan now lifted this whip, and advancing, laid 3 light strokes across the shoulders of both Cheryl and Guile. "Now I charge thee, get hence and go from Sapance, outlawed forever. Thou art waifs forlorn. Seek succor at the Museum of Man. I charge thee, never look back. Leave all thoughts of past and future here at North Garden. Now and forever are you sundered from all bonds, claims, relations, and kinships, together with all pretenses to amity, love, fellowship, and brotherhood with the Saponids of Sapance. Go, I exhort. Go, I command. Go, go, go." Cheryl sunk her teeth into her lower lip. Tears freely coursed her cheek, though she made no sound. With hanging head she started across the lichen of the tundra, and Guile, with a swift stride, joined her. Now there was no looking back. For a space the murmurs, the nervous sounds followed their ears. Then they were alone on the plain. The limitless north lay across the horizon. The tundra filled the foreground and background, an expanse dreary, dun, and moribund. Alone marring the region, the white ruins, once the Museum of Man, rose a league before them, and along the faint trail they walked without words. Guile said in a tentative tone, "There is much I would understand." "Speak," said Cheryl. Her voice was low but composed. "Why are we forced and exhorted to this mission?" "It is thus because it has always been thus. Is not this reason enough?" "Sufficient possibly for you," said Guile. "But for me, the causality is unconvincing. I must acquaint you with the void in my mind, which lusts for knowledge as a lecher yearns for carnality. So pray be patient if my inquisition seems unnecessarily thorough." She glanced at him in astonishment. "Are all to the south so strong for knowing as you?" "In no degree," said Guile. "Everywhere normality of the mind may be observed. The inhabitants adroitly perform the motions which fed them yesterday, last week, a year ago. I have been informed of my aberration well and full. Why strive for a pedant's accumulation, I have been told? Why seek and search? Earth grows cold, man gasps his last. Why forego merriment, music, and revelry for the abstract and abstruse?" "Indeed," said Cheryl. "Well do they counsel. Such is the consensus at Sapance." Guile shrugged. "The rumor goes that I am demon-bereft of my senses. Such may be. In any event, the effect remains, and the obsession haunts me." Cheryl indicated understanding and acquiescence. "Ask on, then. I will endeavor to ease these yearnings." He glanced at her sidelong, studied the charming triangle of her face, the heavy black hair, the great lustrous eyes, dark as yew sapphires. "In happier circumstances there would be other yearnings I would beseech you likewise to ease." "Ask," replied Cheryl of Sapance. "The Museum of Man is close. There is occasion for naught but words." "Why are we thus dismissed and charged with tacit acceptance of our doom?" "The immediate cause is the ghost you saw on the hill. When the ghost appears, then we of Sapance know that the most beautiful maiden and the most handsome youth of the town must be dispatched to the museum. The prime behind the custom I do not know. So it is. So it has been. So it will be till the sun gutters like a coal in the rain and darkens earth, and the winds blow snow over Sapance. But what is our mission? Who greets us? What is our fate? Such details are unknown. Guile mused. The likelihood of pleasure seems small. There are discordants in the episode. You are, beyond doubt, the loveliest creature of the Saponids, the loveliest creature of Earth. But I am a casual stranger, and hardly the most well-favored youth of the town. She smiled a trifle. You are not uncomely. Guile said somberly. Overriding the condition of my person is the fact that I am a stranger, and so bring little loss to the town of Sapons. That aspect has no doubt been considered, the girl said. Guile searched the horizon. Let us then avoid the Museum of Man. Let us circumvent this unknown fate and take to the mountains, and so south to Ascalay. Lust for enlightenment will never fly me in the face of destruction, so clearly implicit. She shook her head. Do you suppose that we would gain by the ruse? The eyes of 100 warriors follow us till we pass through the portals of the museum. Should we attempt to scamp our duty, we should be bound to stakes, stripped of our skins by the inch, and at last be placed in bags with 1,000 scorpions poured around our heads. Such is the traditional penalty. 12 times in history has it been invoked. Guile threw back his shoulders and spoke in a nervous voice. Well, the Museum of Man has been my goal for many years. On this motive I set forth from Sphere, so now I would seek the curator and satisfy my obsession for brain-filling. You are blessed with great fortune, said Cheryl, for you are being granted your heart's desire. Guile could find nothing to say, so for a space they walked in silence. Then he spoke. Cheryl. Yes, Guile of Sphere? Do they separate us and take us apart? I do not know. Cheryl. Yes? Had we met under a happier star... He paused. Cheryl walked in silence. He looked at her coolly. You speak not. But you ask nothing, she said in surprise. Guile turned his face ahead to the Museum of Man. Presently she touched his arm. Guile, I am greatly frightened. Guile gazed at the ground beneath his feet, and a blossom of fire sprang alive in his brain. See the marking through the lichen? Yes? What then? Is it a trail? Dubiously she responded, It is a way worn by the passage of many feet, so then it is a trail. Guile said in restrained jubilation, Here is safety, if I never permit myself to be cozened from the way. But you, I must guard you. You must never leave my side. You must swim in the charm which protects me. Perhaps then we will survive. Cheryl said sadly, Let us not delude our reason, Guile of Sphere. But as they walked, the trail grew plainer, and Guile became correspondingly sanguine, and ever larger bulked the crumble which marked the Museum of Man, presently to occupy all their vision. If a storehouse of knowledge had existed here, little sign of it remained. There was a great flat floor, flagged in white stone, now chalky, broken, and interthrust by weeds. Around this floor rose a series of monoliths, pocked and worn, and toppled off at various heights. These at one time had supported a vast roof. Now of roof there was none, and the walls were but dreams of the far past. So here was the flat floor bounded by the broken stumps of pillars, bare to the winds of time and the glare of cool red sun. The rains had washed the marble. The dust from the mountains had been laid on and swept off, laid on and swept off, and those who had built the museum were less than a mote of this dust. So far and forgotten were they. Think, said Guile. Think of the vastness of knowledge which once was gathered here and which is now one with the soil. Unless, of course, the curator has salvaged and preserved. Cheryl looked about apprehensively. I think rather of the portal, and that which awaits us. Guile, she whispered, I fear greatly. Suppose they tear us apart. Suppose there is torture and death for us. I fear a tremendous impingement, the shock of horror. Guile's own throat was hot and full. He looked about with challenge. While I still breathe and hold power in my arms to fight, there will be none to harm us. Cheryl groaned softly. Guile of Sphere, why did you choose me? Because, said Guile, my eyes went to you like the nectar moth flits to the jacinth. Because you were the loveliest, and I thought nothing but good in store for you. With a shuddering breath, Cheryl said, I must be courageous. After all, if it were not I, it would be some other maid equally fearful. And there is the portal. Guile inhaled deeply, inclined his head, and strode forward. Let us be to it, and know... The portal opened into a nearby monolith, a door of flat black metal. Guile followed the trail to the door, and rapped staunchly with his fist on the small copper gong to the side. The door groaned wide on its hinges, and cool air, smelling of the under-earth. Light is not needed. Anywhere you step, that will be your trail, by an arrangement so agreed with the Waymaker. No, said Guile. We would see the visage of our host. We come at his invitation. The minimum of his guest offering is light. Light there must be before we set foot inside the dungeon. No, we come as seekers after knowledge. We are visitors to be honored. Knowledge, came the sad breathlessness. That shall be yours in full plenitude. Knowledge of many strange affairs. Oh, you shall swim in a tide of knowledge. Guile interrupted the sad, sighing voice. Are you the curator? Hundreds of leagues have I come to bespeak the curator and put him my inquiries? Are you he? By no means. I revile the name of the curator as a treacherous non-essential. Who then may you be? I am no one. Nothing. I am an abstraction, an emotion, the ooze of terror, the sweat of horror, the shake in the air when a scream has departed. You speak the voice of man. Why not? Such things as I speak lie in the closest and dearest center of the human brain. Guile said in a subdued voice, You do not make your invitation as enticing as might be hoped. No matter. Enter you must, into the dark and on the instant, as my lord, who is myself, waxes warm and languorous. If light there be, we enter. No light! No insolent scorch is ever found in the museum. In this case, said Guile, drawing forth his scintillant dagger, I innovate a welcome reform. For see, now there is light. From the underpommel issued a searching glare. The ghost tall before them screeched and fell into twinkling ribbons like pulverized tinsel. There were a few vagrant motes in the air. He was gone. Cheryl, who had stood stark and stiff as one mesmerized, gasped a soft, warm gasp and fell against Guile. How can you be so defiant? Guile said in a voice half laugh, half quaver. In truth, I do not know. Perhaps I find it incredible that the Norns would direct me from Pleasant Sphere, through forest and crag, into the northern waste, merely to play the role of cringing victim. Disbelieving so inconclusive a destiny, I am bold." He moved the dagger to right and left, and they saw themselves to be at the portal of a keep, cut from concreted rock. At the back opened a black depth. Crossing the floor swiftly, Gaial kneeled and listened. He heard no sound. Cheryl at his back stared with eyes as black and deep as the pit itself, and Gaial, turning, received a sudden, irrational impression of a sprite of the olden times, a creature small and delicate, heavy with the weight of her charm, pale, sweet, clean. Leaning with his glowing dagger, he saw a crazy rack of stairs voyaging down into the dark, and his light showed them and their shadows in so confusing a guise that he blinked and drew back. Cheryl said, "What do you fear?" Gaial rose, turned to her. "We are momentarily untended here in the Museum of Man, and we are impelled forward by various forces, you by the will of your people, I by that which has driven me since I first tasted air. If we stay here, we shall be once more arranged in harmony with the hostile pattern. If we go forward boldly, we may so come to a position of strategy and advantage. I propose that we set forth in all courage, descend these stairs, and seek the curator." "But does he exist?" The ghost spoke fervently against him. "Let us go, then," said Cheryl. "I am resigned." Gaial said gravely, "We go in the mental frame of adventure, aggressiveness, zeal. Thus does fear vanish, and the ghosts become creatures of mind weft. Thus does our élan burst the under-earth terror." "We go." They started down the stairs. Back, forth, down flights at varying angles, stages of varying heights, treads at varying widths, so that each step was a matter for concentration. Back, forth, down, and the black barred shadows moved and jerked in bizarre modes on the walls. The flight ended. They stood in a room similar to the entry above. Before them was another black portal, polished at one spot by use. On the walls to either side were inset brass plaques bearing messages in unfamiliar characters. Gaial pushed the door open against a slight pressure of cold air, which, blowing through the aperture, made a slight rush, ceasing when Gaial opened the door farther. "Listen." It was a far sound, an intermittent clacking, and it held enough fell significance to raise the hairs at Gaial's neck. He felt Cheryl's hand gripping his with clammy pressure. Dimming the dagger's glow to a glimmer, Gaial passed through the door, with Cheryl coming after. From afar came the evil sound, and by the echoes they knew they stood in a great hall. Gaial directed the light to the floor. It was of a black, resilient material. Next, the wall, polished stone. He permitted the light to glow in the direction opposite to the sound, and a few paces distant they saw a bulky black case, studded with copper bosses, topped by a shallow glass tray in which could be seen an intricate concourse of metal devices. With the purpose of the black cases not apparent, they followed the wall, and as they walked, similar cases appeared, looming heavy and dull at regular intervals. The clacking receded as they walked. Then they came at a right angle, and turning the corner, they seemed to approach the sound. Black case after black case passed. Slowly, tense as foxes, they walked, eyes groping for sight through the darkness. The wall made another angle, and here there was a door. Gaial hesitated. To follow the new direction of the wall would mean approaching the source of the sound. Would it be better to discover the worst quickly, or to reconnoiter as they went? He propounded the dilemma to Cheryl, who shrugged. It is all one. Sooner or later the ghosts will flit down to pluck at us. Then we are lost. Not while I possess light to stare them away to wisps and shreds, said Guile. Now I would find the curator, and possibly he is to be found behind this door. We will so discover. He laid his shoulder to the door. It eased ajar with a crack of golden light. Guile peered through. He sighed, a muffled sound of wonder. Now he opened the door further. Cheryl clutched at his arm. "This is the museum," said Guile in rapt tone. "Here there is no danger. He who dwells in beauty of this sort may never be other than beneficent." He flung wide the door. The light came from an unknown source, from the air itself, as if leaking from the discrete atoms. Every breath was luminous. The room floated full of invigorating glow. A great rug pelted the floor. A monster tabard woven of gold, brown, bronze, 2 tones of green, fuscous red and smalt blue. Beautiful works of human fashioning ranked the walls. In glorious array hung panels of rich woods, carved, chased, enameled. Scenes of olden times painted on woven fiber, formulas of color, designed to convey emotion rather than reality. To one side hung plats of wood laid on with slabs of soapstone, malachite, and jade in rectangular patterns, richly varied and subtle, with miniature flecks of cinnabar, rhodochrosite, and coral for warmth. Beside was a section given to discs of luminous green, flickering and fluorescent with varying blue films and moving dots of scarlet and black. Here were representations of 300 marvelous flowers, blooms of a forgotten age, no longer extant on waning earth. There were as many starburst patterns, rigidly conventionalized in form, but each of subtle distinction. All these and a multitude of other creations, selected from the best of human fervor. The door thudded softly behind them. Staring, every inch of skin a-tingle, the two from Earth's final time moved forward through the hall. "Somewhere near must be the curator," whispered Guile. "There is a sense of careful tending and great effort here in the gallery. Look." Opposite were 2 doors, laden with the sense of much use. Guile strode quickly across the room, but was unable to discern the means for opening the door, for it bore no latch, key, handle, knob, or bar. He rapped with his knuckles and waited. No sound returned. Cheryl tugged at his arm. "These are private regions. It is best not to venture too rudely." Guile turned away, and they continued down the gallery. Past the real expression of man's brightest dreamings they walked, until the concentration of so much fire and spirit and creativity put them into awe. "What great minds lie in the dust," said Guile in a low voice. "What gorgeous souls have vanished into the buried ages. What marvelous creatures are lost past the remotest memory. Never more will there be the like. Now, in the last fleeting moments, humanity festers, rich as rotten fruit. Rather than master and overpower our world, our highest aim is to cheat it through sorcery." Cheryl said, "But Guile, you are apart. You are not like this." "I would know," declared Guile with fierce emphasis. "In all my youth this ache has driven me, and I have journeyed from the old Manset sphere to learn from the curator. I am dissatisfied with the mindless accomplishments of the magicians, who have all their lore by rote." Cheryl gazed at him with marveling expression, and Guile's soul throbbed with love. She felt him quiver and whispered recklessly, "Guile of Sphere." I am yours. I melt for you. When we win to peace, said Guile, then our world will be of gladness. The room turned a corner, widened, and now the clacking sound they had noticed in the dark outer hall returned, louder, more suggestive of unpleasantness. It seemed to enter the gallery through an arched doorway opposite. Guile moved quietly to this door, with Cheryl at his heels, and so they peered into the next chamber. A great face looked from the wall, a face taller than Guile, as tall as Guile might reach with hands on high. The chin rested on the floor, the scalp slanted back into the panel. Guile stared, taken aback. In this pageant of beautiful objects, the grotesque visage was the disparity and dissonance a lunatic might have created. Ugly and vile was the face, of a gut-wrenching, silly obscenity. The skin shone a gunmetal sheen. The eyes gazed dully from slanting folds of greenish tissue. The nose was a small lump. The mouth a gross, pulpy slash. In sudden uncertainty, Guile turned to Cheryl. Does this not seem an odd work, so to be honored here in the Museum of Man? Cheryl was staring with eyes agonized and wide. Her mouth opened, quivered. Wetness streaked her chin. With hands jerking, shaking, she grabbed his arm, staggered back into the gallery. "Guile!" she cried. "Guile, come away!" Her voice rose to a pitch. "Come away! Come away!" He faced her in surprise. "What are you saying?" "That horrible thing in there! It is but the diseased effort of an elder artist. It lives! How is this? It lives!" she babbled. "It looked at me, then turned and looked at you, and it moved, and then I pulled you away." Guile shrugged off her hand. In stark disbelief, he faced through the doorway. "Ah," breathed Guile. The face had changed. The torpor had evaporated. The glaze had departed the eye. The mouth squirmed. A hiss of escaping gas sounded. The mouth opened. A great gray tongue lolled forth. And from this tongue darted a tendril slimed with mucus. It terminated in a grasping hand which groped for Guile's ankle. He jumped aside. The hand missed its clutch. The tendril coiled. Guile, in an extremity, with his bowels clenched by sick fear, sprang back into the gallery. The hand seized Cheryl, grasped her ankle. The eyes glistened. And now the flabby tongue swelled another wen, sprouted a new member. Cheryl stumbled, fell limp, her eyes staring, foam at her lips. Guile, shouting in a voice he could not hear, shouting high and crazy, ran forward, slashing with his dagger. He cut at the gray wrist, but his knife sprang away as if the steel itself were horrified. His gorge at his teeth, he seized the tendril. With a mighty effort he broke it against his knee. The face winced. The tendril jerked back. Guile leapt forward, dragged Cheryl into the gallery, lifted her, carried her back out of reach. Through the doorway now, Guile glared in hate and fear. The mouth had closed. It sneered disappointment and frustrated lust. And now Guile saw a strange thing. From the dank nostril oozed a wisp of white which swirled, writhed, formed a tall thing in a white robe, a thing with a draw face and eyes like holes in a skull. Whimpering and mewing in distaste for the light, it wavered forward into the gallery, moving with curious little pauses and hesitancies. Guile stood still. Fear had exceeded its power. Fear no longer had meaning. A brain could react only to the maximum of its intensity. How could this thing harm him now? He would smash it with his hands, beat it into sighing fog. "Hold! "Hold, hold," came a new voice. "Hold, hold, hold, hold. My charms and tokens an ill day for Thorsengall. But then, avaunt, you ghost. Back to the orifice, back and avaunt. Avaunt, I say. Go, else I loose the actinix. Trespass is not allowed by supreme command from the Lycurgate. I, the Lycurgate of Thorsengall. Avaunt, so then." The ghost wavered, paused, staring in fell passivity at the old man who had hobbled into the gallery. Back to the snoring face wandered the ghost, and let itself be sucked up into the nostril. The face rumbled behind its lips, then opened the great gray gape and belched a white, fiery lick that was like flame, but not flame. It sheeted, flapped at the old man, who moved not an inch. From a rod fixed high on the doorframe came a whirling disk of golden sparks. It cut and dismembered the white sheet, destroyed it back to the mouth of the face, whence now issued a black bar. This bar edged into the whirling disk and absorbed the sparks. There was an instant of dead silence. Then the old man crowed. "Ah, you evil episode! You seek to interrupt my tenure? But no, there is no validity in your purpose. My clever baton holds your unnatural sorcery in abeyance. You are as naught. Why do you not disengage and retreat into Geldred?" The rumble behind the large lips continued. The mouth opened wide. A gray, viscous cavern was so displayed. The eyes glittered in titanic emotion. The mouth yelled, a roaring wave of violence, a sound to buffet the head and drive shock like a nail into the mind. The baton sprayed a mist of silver. The sound curved and centralized and sucked into the metal fog. The sound was captured and consumed. It was never heard. The fog balled, lengthened to an arrow, plunged with intense speed at the nose, and buried itself in the pulp. There was a heavy sound. An explosion. The face seethed in pain, and the nose was a blasted clutter of shredded gray plasms. They waved like starfish arms and grew together once more. And now the nose was pointed like a cone. The old man said, "You are captious today, my demoniac visitant. A vicious trait. You would disturb poor old Curlin in his duties? So, you are ingenuous and neglectful. So-ho, baton!" And he turned and peered at the rod. "You have tasted that sound? Spew out a fitting penalty. Smear the odious face with your infallible retort." A flat sound. A black flail which curled, slapped the air, and smote home to the face. A glowing wheel sprang into being. The face sighed, and the eyes twisted up into their folds of greenish tissue. Curlin the curator laughed, a shrill yammer on a single tone. He stopped short, and the laugh vanished as if it had never begun. He turned to Guyol and Cheryl, who stood pressed together in the doorframe. "How now? How now? You are after the gong. The study hours are long ended. Why do you linger?" He shook a stern finger. "The museum is not the site for roguery. This I admonish. So now be off, home to Thorsengall. Be more prompt the next time you disturb the established order." He paused and threw a fretful glance over his shoulder. "The day has gone ill. The nocturnal keykeeper is inexcusably late. Surely I have waited an hour on the sluggard. The Lycurgate shall be so informed. I would be home to couch and hearth. Here is ill use for old Curlin, thus to detain him for the careless retard of the night watch, and further the encroachment of you two laggards. Away now, and be off, out into the twilight." And he advanced, making directive motions with his hands. Gael said, "My Lord Curator, I must speak words with you." The old man halted, peered. "Eh? What now? At the end of a long day's effort? No, you are out of order. Regulation must be observed. Attend my audiarium at the 4th Circuit tomorrow morning. Then we shall hear you. So go now. Go." Gael fell back nonplussed. Cheryl fell on her knees. "Sir Curator, we beg you for help. We have no place to go." Curlin, the curator, looked at her blankly. "No place to go? What folly you utter! Go to your domicile, or to the pub Eschentarium, or to the temple, or to the outward inn. Forsooth, Thorsengall is free with lodging. The museum is no casual tavern." "My lord," cried Gael desperately, "will you hear me? We speak from emergency." "Say on, then." "Some malignancy has bewitched your brain. Will you credit this?" "Ah, indeed?" ruminated the curator. "There is no Thorsengall. There is naught but dark waste. Your city is an eon gone." The curator smiled benevolently. "Ah, sad. The sad case. So it is with these younger minds. The frantic drive of life is the prime unhinger." He shook his head. "My duty is clear. Tired bones, you must wait your well-deserved rest. Fatigue, be gone. Duty and simple humanity make demands. Here is madness to be countered and cleared, and in any event the nocturnal key-keeper is not here to relieve me of my tedium." He beckoned. "Come." Hesitantly, Gael and Cheryl followed him. He opened one of his doors, passed through muttering and expostulating with doubt and watchfulness. Gael and Cheryl came after. The room was cubical, floored with dull black stuff, walled with myriad golden knobs on all sides. A hooded chair occupied the center of the room, and beside it was a chest-high lectern, whose face displayed a number of toggles and knurled wheels. "This is the curator's own chair of knowledge," explained Curlin. "As such it will, upon proper adjustment, impost the pattern of hynomenurial clarity. So, I demand the correct summatzindic arrangement." He manipulated the manuals. "And now, if you will compose yourself, I will repair your hallucination. It is beyond my normal call of duty, but I am humane, and would not be spoken of as mean or unwilling." Gael inquired anxiously. "Lord Curator, this chair of clarity, how will it affect me?" Curlin the curator said grandly, "The fibers of your brain are twisted, snarled, frayed, and so make contact with unintentional areas. By the marvelous craft of our modern cerebrologists, this hood will compose your synapses with the correct readings from the library, those of normality. You must understand, and so repair the skein, and make you once more a whole man." "Once I sit in the chair," Gael inquired, "what will you do?" "Merely close this contact, engage this arm, throw in this toggle, then you daze. In 30 seconds this bulb glows, signaling the success and completion of the treatment. Then I reverse the manipulation, and you arise a creature of renewed sanity." Gael looked at Cheryl. "Did you hear and comprehend?" "Yes, Gael," in a small voice. "Remember." Then to the curator, "Marvelous. But how must I sit?" "Merely relax in the seat. Then I pull the hood slightly forward to shield the eyes from distraction." Gael leaned forward, peered gingerly into the hood. "I fear I do not understand." The curator hopped forward impatiently. "It is an act of the utmost facility. Like this." He sat in the chair. "And how will the hood be applied?" "In this wise." Curlin seized a handle, pulled the shield over his face. "Quick," said Guile to Cheryl. She sprang to the lectern. Curlin, the curator, made a motion to release the hood. Guile seized the spindly frame, held it. Cheryl flung the switches. The curator relaxed, sighed. Cheryl gazed at Guile, dark eyes wide and liquid as the great water Flammarion of South Almery. "Is he dead?" "I hope not." They gazed uncertainly at the relaxed form. Seconds passed. A clanging noise sounded from afar, a crush, a wrench, an exultant bellow, lesser halloos of wild triumph. Guile rushed to the door. Prancing, wavering, sidling, into the gallery came a multitude of ghosts. Through the open door behind, Guile could see the great head. It was shoving out, pushing into the room. Great ears appeared, part of a bull neck, wreathed with purple wattles. The wall cracked, sagged, crumbled. A great hand thrust through, a forearm. Cheryl screamed. Guile, pale and quivering, slammed the door in the face of the nearest ghost. It seeped in around the jamb, slowly, wisp by wisp. Guile sprang to the lectern. The bulb showed dullness. Guile's hands twitched along the controls. "Only Curlin's awareness controls the magic of the baton," he panted. "So much is clear." He stared into the bulb with agonized urgency. "Glow, bulb! Glow!" By the door the ghost seeped and billowed. "Glow, bulb! Glow!" The bulb glowed. With a sharp cry, Guile returned the switches to neutrality, jumped down, flung up the hood. Curlin, the curator, sat looking at him. Behind the ghost formed itself, a tall white thing in white robes, and the dark eye-holes stared like outlets into non-imagination. Curlin, the curator, sat looking. The ghost moved under the robes. A hand like a bird's foot appeared, holding a clod of dingy matter. The ghost cast the matter to the floor. It exploded into a puff of black dust. The motes of the cloud grew, became a myriad of wriggling insects. With one accord they darted across the floor, growing as they spread, and became scuttling creatures with monkey heads. Curlin, the curator, moved. "Baton!" he said. He held up his hand. It held his baton. The baton spat an orange gout, red dust. It puffed before the rushing horde, and each mote became a red scorpion. So ensued a ferocious battle, and little shrieks and chittering sounds rose from the floor. The monkey-headed things were killed, routed. The ghost sighed, moved his claw hand once more. But the baton spat forth a ray of purest light, and the ghost sloughed into nothingness. "Curlin!" cried Guile. "The demon is breaking into the gallery!" Curlin flung open the door, stepped forth. "Baton!" said Curlin. "Perform thy utmost intent!" The demon said, "No, Curlin. Hold the magic. I thought you dazed. Now I retreat." With a vast quaking and heaving, he pulled back until once more only his face showed through the hole. "Baton," said Curlin, "be you on guard." The baton disappeared from his hand. Curlin turned and faced Guile and Cheryl. "There is need for many words, for now I die. I die, and the museum shall lie alone. So let us speak quickly, quickly, quickly." Curlin moved with feeble steps to a portal which snapped aside as he approached. Guile and Cheryl, speculating on the probable trends of Curlin's disposition, stood hesitantly to the rear. "Come! Come!" said Curlin in sharp impatience. "My strength flags. I die. You have been my death." Guile moved slowly forward, with Cheryl half a pace behind. Suitable response to the accusation escaped him. Words seemed without conviction. Curlin surveyed them with a thin grin. "Halt your misgivings and hasten. The necessities to be accomplished in the time available there, to make the task like trying to write the tomes of Kai in a minimum of ink. I wane. My pulsing comes in shallow tides. My sight flickers." He waved a despairing hand, then, turning, led them into the inner chamber, where he slumped into a great chair. With many uneasy glances at the door, Guile and Cheryl settled upon a padded couch. Curlin jeered in a feeble voice. "You fear the white phantasms? Pooh! They are pent from the gallery by the baton, which contains their every effort. Only when I am smitten out of mind, or dead, will the baton cease its function. You must know," he added with somewhat more vigor, "that the energies and dynamics do not channel from my reign, but from the central potentium of the museum, which is perpetual. I merely direct and order the rod." "But this demon, who or what is he? Why does he come to look through the walls?" Curlin's face settled into a bleak mask. "He is Blickdak, ruler divinity of the demon world Geldred. He wrenched the whole, intent on gulfing the knowledge of the museum into his mind. But I forestalled him, so he sits waiting in the hole till I die. Then he will glut himself with erudition to the great disadvantage of men." "Why cannot this demon be exorted hence and the hole abolished?" Curlin the curator shook his head. "The fires and furious powers I control are not valid in the air of the demon world, where substance and form are of different entity. So far as you see him, he has brought his environment with him. So far, he is safe. When he ventures further into the museum, the power of Earth dissolves the Geldred mode. Then may I spray him with prismatic fervor from the potentium. But stay. Enough of Blickdak for the nonce. Tell me, who are you? Why are you ventured here? And what is the news of Thorsengall?" Guile said in a halting voice, "Thorsengall is past beyond memory. There is naught above but arid tundra and the old town of the Saponids. I am of the Southland. I have coursed many leagues so that I might speak to you and fill my mind with knowledge. This girl Cheryl is of the Saponids, and victim of an ancient custom which sends beauty into the museum at the behest of Blickdak's ghosts." "Ah," breathed Curlin. "Have I been so aimless? I recall these youthful shapes which Blickdak employed to relieve the tedium of his vigil. They flit down my memory like mayflies along a panel of glass. I put them aside as creatures of his own conception, postulated by his own imagery." Cheryl shrugged in bewilderment. "But why? What use to him are human creatures?" Curlin said dully, "Girl, you are all charm and freshness. The monstrous urges of the demon lord Blickdak are past your conceiving. These youths of both sexes are his play, on whom he practices various junctures, joinings, coity, perversions, sadisms, nauseas, antics, and at last struggles to the death. Then he sends forth a ghost, demanding further youth and beauty." Cheryl whispered, "This was to have been I." Guile said in puzzlement. "I cannot understand. Such acts, in my understanding, are the characteristic derangements of humanity. They are anthropoid by the very nature of the functioning sacs, glands, and organs. Since Blickdack is a demon—" "Consider him," spoke Curlin. "His lineaments, his apparatus. He is nothing else but anthropoid, and such is his origin, together with all the demons, frits, and winged glowing-eyed creatures that infest latter-day Earth. Blickdack, like the others, is from the mind of man. The sweaty condensation, the stench and vileness, the cloacal humors, the brutal delights, the rapes and sodomies, the scatophilic whims, the manifold tittering lubricities that have drained through humanity, formed a vast tumor. So Blickdack assumed his being. So now this is he. You have seen how he molds his being. So he performs his enjoyments. But of Blickdack enough. I die. I die." He sank into the chair with heaving chest. "See me? My eyes vary and waver. My breath is shallow as a bird's. My bones are the pith of an old vine. I have lived beyond knowledge. In my madness I knew no passage of time. Where there is no knowledge, there are no somatic consequences. Now I remember the years and centuries, the millennia, the epochs. They are like quick glimpses through a shutter. So, curing my madness, you have killed me." Cheryl blinked and drew back. "But when you die, what then?" "Blickdack," Guile asked, "in the Museum of Man is there no knowledge of the exorcisms necessary to dissolve this demon? He is clearly our first antagonist, our immediacy." "Blickdack must be eradicated," said Curlin. "Then will I die in ease. Then must you assume the care of the museum." He licked his white lips. "An ancient principle specifies that, in order to destroy a substance, the nature of the substance must be determined. In short, before Blickdack may be dissolved, we must discover his elemental nature." And his eyes moved glassily to Guile. "Your pronouncement is sound beyond argument," admitted Guile. "But how may this be accomplished? Blickdack will never allow such an investigation." "No, there must be subterfuge, some instrumentality." "The ghosts are part of Blickdack's stuff?" "Indeed." "Can the ghosts be stayed and prevented?" "Indeed. In a box of light, the which I can effect by a thought. Yes. A ghost we must have." Curlin raised his head. "Baton, one ghost. Admit a ghost." A moment passed. Curlin held up his hand. There was a faint scratch at the door, and a soft whine could be heard without. "Open," said a voice full of sobs and catches and quavers. "Open, and let forth the youthful creatures to Blickdack. He finds boredom and lassitude in his vigil, so let the two come forth to negate his unease." Curlin laboriously rose to his feet. "It is done." From behind the door came a sad voice. "I am pent. I am snared in scorching brilliance." "Now we discover," said Guile. "What dissolves the ghost dissolves Blickdack." "True indeed," assented Curlin. "Why not light?" inquired Cheryl. "Light parts the fabric of the ghosts like a gust of wind tatters the fog." "But merely for their fragility. Blickdack is harsh and solid and can withstand the fiercest radiance safe in his demon-land alcove." And Curlin mused. After a moment he gestured to the door. "We go to the image expander. There we will explode the ghost to macroid dimension. So shall we find his basis. Guile of sphere, you must support my frailness. In truth my limbs are weak as wax." On Guile's arm he tottered forward, and with Cheryl close at their heels they gained the gallery. Here the ghost wept in its cage of light, and searched constantly for a dark aperture to seep his essence through. Paying him no heed, Curlin hobbled and limped across the gallery. In their wake followed the box of light and, perforce, the ghost. "Open the great door!" cried Curlin, in a voice beset with cracking and hoarseness. "The great door into the cognitive repository." Cheryl ran ahead and thrust her force against the door. It slid aside, and they looked into the great dark hall, and the golden light from the gallery dwindled into the shadows, and was lost. "Call for Lumen," Curlin said. "Lumen," cried Guile. "Lumen, attend!" Light came to the great hall, and it proved so tall that the pilasters along the wall dwindled to threads, and so long and wide that a man might be winded to fatigue in running a dimension. Spaced in equal rows were the black cases with the copper bosses that Guile and Cheryl had noted on their entry, and above each hung 5 similar cases, precisely fixed, floating without support. "What are these?" asked Guile in wonder. "Would my poor brain encompassed 100th part of what these banks know?" panted Curlin. "They are great brains, crammed with all that, known, experienced, achieved, or recorded by man. Here is all the lost lore, early and late, the fabulous imaginings, the history of 10 million cities, the beginnings of time and the presumed finalities, the reason for human existence and the reason for the reason. Daily I have labored and toiled in these banks. My achievement has been a synopsis of the most superficial sort, a panorama across a wide and multifarious country." Said Cheryl, "Would not the craft to destroy Bildak be contained here?" "Indeed, indeed. Our task would be merely to find the information. Under which casing would we search? Consider these categories: demon lands, killings and mortifications, expositions and dissolutions of evil, history of Grand Valand, where such an entity was repelled, attractive and detractive hyperordinates, therapy for hallucinants and ghost-takers, constructive journal, item for regeneration of burst walls, subdivision for invasion by demons, procedural suggestions in time of risk, these and 1,000 more. Somewhere is knowledge of how to smite Blickdak's abhorred face back into his quasi-place. But where to look? There is no index major, none except a poor synopsis of my compilation. He who seeks specific knowledge must often go on an extended search." His voice trailed off, then, "Forward, forward, through the banks to the mechanismus." So through the banks they went, like roaches in a maze, and behind drifted the cage of light with the wailing ghost. At last they entered a chamber smelling of metal. Again Curlin instructed Guile, and Guile called, "Attend us, Lumen, attend." Through intricate devices walked the 3, Guile lost and rapt beyond inquiry, even though his brain ached with the want of knowing. At a tall booth, Curlin halted the cage of light. A pane of vitrion dropped before the ghost. "Observe now," Curlin said, and manipulated the activants. They saw the ghost, depicted and projected, the flowing robe, the haggard visage, The face grew large, flattened. A segment under the vacant eye became a scabrous white place. It separated into pustules, and a single pustule swelled to fill the pane. The crater of the pustule was an intricate, stippled surface, a mesh as of fabric, knit in a lacy pattern. "Behold," said Cheryl, "he is a thing woven as if by thread." Guile turned eagerly to Curlin. Curlin raised a finger for silence. "Indeed, indeed. A goodly thought. Especially since here beside us is a rotor of extreme swiftness, used in reeling the cognitive filaments of the cases. Now then, observe. I reach to this panel. I select a mesh. I withdraw a thread and note. The meshes ravel and loosen and part. And now to the bobbin on the rotor, and I wrap the thread, and now with a twist we have the cincture made." Cheryl said dubiously, "Does not the ghost observe and note your doing?" "By no means," asserted Curlin. "The pain of Vitrion shields our actions. He is too exhausted to attend. And now I dissolve the cage, and he is free." The ghost wandered forth, cringing from the light. "Go!" cried Curlin. "Back to your genetrix! Back! Return and go!" The ghost departed. Curlin said to Guile, "Follow! Find when Blickdack snuffs him up." Guile, at a cautious distance, watched the ghost seep up into the black nostril, and returned to where Curlin waited by the rotor. "The ghost has once more become part of Blickdack." "Now then," said Curlin, "we cause the rotor to twist, the bobbin to whirl, and we shall observe." The rotor whirled to a blur. The bobbin, as long as Guile's arm, became spun with ghost thread, at first glowing pastel polychrome, then nacre, then fine milk ivory. The rotor spun, 1,000,000 times a minute, and the thread drawn unseen and unknown from Blickdack thickened on the bobbin. The rotor spun. The bobbin was full, a cylinder shining with glossy, silken sheen. Curlin slowed the rotor. Guile snapped a new bobbin into place, and the unraveling of Blickdack continued. 3 bobbins, 4, 5, and Guile, observing Blickdack from afar, found the giant face quiescent, the mouth working and sucking, creating the clacking sound which at first caused them apprehension. 8 bobbins. Blickdack opened his eyes, stared in puzzlement around the chamber. 12 bobbins. A discolored spot appeared on the sagging cheek, and Blickdack quivered in uneasiness. 20 bobbins. The spot spread across Blickdack's visage, across the slanted foredome, and his mouth hung lax. He hissed and fretted. 30 bobbins. Blickdack's head seemed stale and putrid. The gunmetal sheen had become an angry maroon. The eyes bulged. The mouth hung open. The tongue lolled limp. 50 bobbins. Blickdack collapsed. His dome lowered against the febrile mouth. His eyes shone like feverish coals. 60 bobbins. Blickdack was no more. And with the dissolution of Blickdack, so dissolved Geldred, the demon land created for the housing of evil. The breach in the wall gave on barren rock, unbroken and rigid. And in the mechanismus 60 shining bobbins lay stacked neat. The evil so disorganized glowed with purity and iridescence. Curlin fell back against the wall. "I expire. My time has come. I have guarded well the museum. Together we have won it away from Blickdack. Attend me now. Into your hands I pass the curacy. Now The museum is your charge to guard and preserve." "For what end?" asked Cheryl. "Earth expires, almost as you. Wherefore knowledge?" "More now than ever," gasped Curlin. "Attend! The stars are bright, the stars are fair. The banks know blessed magic to fleet you to youthful climes. Now I go. I die." "Wait!" cried Gial. "Wait, I beseech!" "Why wait?" whispered Curlin. "The way to peace is on me. You call me back." "How do I extract from the banks?" "The key to the index is in my chambers. The index of my life." And Curlin died. Gial and Cheryl climbed to the upper ways and stood outside the portal on the ancient flagged floor. It was night. The marble shone faintly underfoot. The broken columns loomed on the sky. Across the plain the yellow lights of sapons shone warm through the trees. Above in the sky shone the stars. Gial said to Cheryl, "There is your home. There is Sapons. Do you wish to return?" She shook her head. "Together we have looked through the eyes of knowledge. We have seen old Thorsengal and the Sherrod Empire before it, and Golwan Andra before that, and the 40 Cades even before. We have seen the warlike green men and the knowledgeable Ferials and the clams who departed Earth for the stars, as did the Marioneth before them, and the grey sorcerers still earlier. We have seen oceans rise and fall, the mountains crust up, peak and melt in the beat of rain. We have looked on the sun when it glowed hot and full and yellow. No, Gial, there is no place for me at Sapons." Gial, leaning back on the weathered pillar, looked up to the stars. "Knowledge is ours, Cheryl, all of knowing to our call. And what shall we do?" Together they looked up to the white stars. "What shall we do?"